Morning folks, John here again. Right, I hope you saw the video I did the other day regarding the dementia and death tax. Well, this video is a new fresh look at this with a bit more of a different bit of information, different kind of angle. Now I'm going to read off the screen because I've just emailed all this to one of my friends who for the first time has decided to actually vote in one of the elections because they've never voted before. And they're voting for Labour off the back of all the information and evidence that's been going on, and apparently a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about as well. So I'm going to read out the email. So after the pleasantries, we start off with, right, politics. You are definitely making the right choice here, voting for Jeremy Corbyn. Did you see my video about the dementia and death tax scandal? This is a rehearsal by the Tories for what is to come from the NHS, and here's some elaboration, and I've made it into 15 points. So number one, privatise the NHS. Number two, make people buy big insurances on a general level as unsecured against assets, just like regular insurance. So that would cover the majority of people who just want medical or need medical insurance, and it's a general thing. 3, for people with pre-existing conditions and long-term illnesses, and for people who are out of the ability to be insured, because insurance companies won't just cover everybody. So for example, obese people with COPD and other cardiovascular issues, people that have had long-term cancers before insurances have even been needed, will be enticed to buy bigger insurance premiums by way of taking secured equity releases against their homes. Now, I'm going to go back into this example from the previous video. Number 4, the example, an 80-year-old woman who has dementia and has a £300,000 house but no money in the bank will have to have £200,000 worth of securities against her home when she dies to pay for care while she's alive. But the house hasn't been done up for 50 odd years because she probably bought it for a couple of £1,000s after the war, and it's currently a shithole inside, and it's only worth probably £150,000 at market value because of the condition. So the corporations, banks and government allowed the overvaluation of the house to £300,000, and when she has spent her £200,000 worth of care, the state pay the rest. Let me just get rid of what's flashing on the screen because it's annoying me. The state pay the rest. So she's had a £300,000 house that's in a shanty condition inside because she's poor, she's got no money in the bank, and she's ended up having an illness and she's had to spend 200 grand's worth of the equity. She's down to her last 100,000, and the lovely government are now going to pay for the rest. So, number 5, when she dies, the insurance company comes knocking immediately for their £200,000 back, and clauses in the insurance policy denote that the insurance company, now having a majority share in the commercial liens against the house, so remember it was £300,000 on the valuation, so that's £100,000 worth of equity supposedly if it's valued at that goes to who inherits it, the executor to the estate, and £200,000 as a majority share sitting with the insurance companies and whoever they're underwritten by, the banks, the government. So where do we get to? When she dies, insurance policy denote that the insurance company now having a majority share in the house, 100 grand to the inheritor, 200 grand to the insurance firm, can dictate the terms, and they want a fast buck. They do not give the inheritors, the executors of the estate, chance to renovate and sell for market value, 300 grand. Number 6, the house then gets sold for the estimated 150,000. 7, there is now a shortfall of £50,000 to pay back, and the insurance policy will force this debt onto the inheritor, onto the executor to the estate, the kids of the old woman. Number 8, the inheritor would either have to pay out of their own pocket or remortgage or equity release against their own property to fund the £50,000 shortfall. So this is going to breed contempt in the house valuation market as well, because when people take insurance commercial liens for massive amounts of care and especially if the NHS gets privatised, then the estate agents, not necessarily the estate agents, but the whole system of house valuations will overvalue, so there's more to pay back, which is common sense. So that's going to breed contempt. Number 9. But what if the people, the children of the old woman who inherited the house and the debt, what if the people become ill in future themselves and want loans or mortgages of their own, or to guarantor their own kids' houses and mortgages and pay 25% deposits on new houses for their kids? The answer is they can't. Number 10. Due to all of the above, there is now a massive insecurity in the house buying sector, as the public thinks it's pointless and it will only be taken back off them by the way of insurance companies. And I'll read that one again, sorry. Due to all of the previous points mentioned, there is now massive insecurity in the house buying sector, as the public thinks that it's pointless and houses will only be taken back off them by the insurance companies and banks and leave nothing for their own kids to inherit. So that's going to knacker the housing market up. Number 11. House prices will plummet across the country and still nobody wants to buy, except for buy-to-let landlords and mostly the UK government themselves and banks and corporations, who are all in bed together because they're all in it for the bunts. They will buy them all up nice and cheap to keep as capital and use the ownership contracts to perform yet more securitisation of assets by floating the worth of the property and the contracts, the paperwork, floating it to hedge funders and venture capitalists, which then inflates the economy more by introducing more pretend money, fiat currency. Number 12. Once the government and corporations and banks own all the houses, they put them all into the rental sector and then begin ripping tenants off with inflated rental costs and uncontrollable rates. They also socially cleanse areas of the country by forcing poorer people out of sink estates and the like, so that they can raze the areas to the ground as rubble and rebuild as posh, expensive houses that only rich people can afford. Number 13. Regarding university expenses, so we're just slightly moving off kilter, but it's still on the same point, which is a land grab, basically. Regarding university expenses, because Jeremy Corbyn wants to make further education free for everybody, and if we vote for Corbyn, he's promised to make it free immediately. So anybody that's just coming up to the end of their academic year now, because we're coming up to June, and they want to start applying for universities or have already got places in universities, for most of them maybe, then they will immediately get it for free. So, regarding university expenses, being an average of about £50,000 for a degree debt these days, people who are academic enough to go to university will come out with a debt of around £50,000 plus attached to their administrative person, which is the Mr, Mrs, Ms, Doctor, Reverend, the prefix version of you, that you are contractually bound to via the registration of your birth certificate and national insurance number as a slave to corporate bondage. This will never leave you until it's paid for, or after it expires, apparently after 30 years. So you'll have a 50-odd grand university debt sitting on your shoulders, sitting against your credit rating for the next 30 years unless you can pay it back or afford to pay it back. And I think you have to be earning £21,500 or something before you can, before you have to start paying it back. Okay, number 14. These post-grad people will now have a debt that makes them unqualified for a mortgage, or with a hefty deposit guaranteed by their parents. See previous points. Most or all of them, bearing in mind all of the above, will end up having to rent, leaving more houses to be bought on the cheap by corporations and banks. Number 15. Those people not academic enough to go to uni, and those that can't afford it, and those that aren't from good backgrounds who have got families that can afford to pay for it, will end up underqualified in industry, like we're seeing, and will end up, or likely end up, on lower income, insecure, no workers' rights, and 0-hour contracted employment schemes and apprenticeships. They too will not qualify for a mortgage at all, and they will be forced to rent too, and then they will be ripped off with the rest of them, while the banks and corporations own the house they stole via ripping off the original owner of their wealth, assets and health insurance, and holding that as capital, securitising it, and also having an uncontrolled rent sector that just goes up and up and up. This is the great British land grab. So I hope that goes, that's the end of the thing that I emailed to them this morning. I hope that makes some sense to you folks, because this is why I've been harping on about the NHS being the checkmate situation. As soon as the NHS is gone, they can start ripping everybody's assets out of them by making people have to take out huge amounts of money secured against their properties, so that when they die, the properties get ripped back off them. So if you vote for Labour, you're in the best chance of getting Jeremy Corbyn in and putting a stop to all this tyranny. And if you vote for the Conservatives, well, why? Because even people with money in the bank aren't secure now. Even people that would have previously voted for Conservatives, people that might have a few £100,000 in the bank, they've got degrees of their own, they might not even have any debts, they've got a nice big posh house and a couple of posh cars and live in a posh area. Even if they vote Conservative, they're looking at this problem because they've got more to lose. So now, the richer you are, the more you've got to lose. The poorer you are, or if you've got no money in the bank but you've got a house that's worth something, you're at risk of having it overvalued for overlending, and that security then passes on to the executor to the estate, who's going to end up in debt. So who would want to inherit a house from their parents with a massive debt? Nobody. So nobody's going to want to be party to somebody's will. So that means that after so long of sitting on probate and whatever other things there are to do with it, they go to the state because there was no will. I think I'll rest my case. Have I switched it off? No.